A journey shrouded in mystery, dark secrets, and buried truths. This story will take you into a world where the line between reality and illusion begins to blur. If you love gripping, intense stories that keep you on the edge of your seat until the very end, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single twist.
And now, let's begin.
Jonathan Harper had devoted nearly 2 decades of his life to the art and science of creation. As a renowned reproductive specialist, his days were filled with the hum of high-tech machinery and quiet moments of hope as he helped couples overcome infertility. His hands, steady and compassionate, had ushered many toward the miracle of life. Yet behind his clinical success lay a heart shrouded in loneliness, a loneliness that grew after Emily, the woman he had once loved fiercely, vanished from his life without explanation. In the sterile corridors of his clinic, amidst the gentle beeps of monitors and the soft rustling of patient files, Jonathan's personal life had become a closed chapter. One cool autumn morning, as the wind carried a hint of distant rain, Jonathan found himself staring at an envelope that broke the monotony of his routine. The envelope was cream-colored, edged with delicate gold embossing, and sealed with a wax stamp that bore a familiar crest. With measured curiosity, he slid his finger under the flap and unfolded the letter inside. It was a wedding invitation, from Michael Turner, his childhood friend and once inseparable confidant.
Jonathans Hart skippet abit.
He remembered the days when Michael's laughter filled their long conversations about dreams and possibilities. But for years, Jonathan had retreated into his work, distancing himself from the messy intimacy of relationships. He had assumed that friendships, like fleeting seasons, would slowly fade into memory. The invitation, however, was a stark reminder that time had marched on for others, even for Michael, who Jonathan now discovered was engaged and preparing for a new life chapter. As Jonathan read the elegant script inviting him to an opulent wedding at a sprawling estate, conflicting emotions surged within him. There was nostalgia for lost moments of shared joy, an ache for the companionship he had once known, and a prick of envy at Michael's seemingly unburdened happiness. Yet mingled with these was a hesitant curiosity. Could this gathering be the key to reconnecting with a world he had long forsaken? He recalled the countless nights spent poring over patient files and surgical plans, each procedure a quiet victory against the odds. In contrast, his personal life had become a series of muted sunsets and empty conversations. The invitation was not merely a summons to celebrate another's union, it was a beckoning to face his own solitude, a call to step out of his self-imposed exile and rediscover what it meant to be part of a living, breathing community. With a heavy yet determined heart, Jonathan tucked the invitation into his worn leather jacket.
Outside. The wind whisperet of changes leave us swirled in the cool morning air.
In that moment, he resolved to attend the wedding, not just for Michael, but for himself. Perhaps amid the laughter, music, and shared memories, he could find a piece of the life he'd long abandoned. And so, as the day unfolded with the promise of an unknown future, Jonathan took his first tentative step toward mending the fractures of his heart, uncertain of what revelations the gathering might bring. Jonathan arrived at the estate under a sky that shimmered with the golden hues of a fading afternoon. The venue was a grand mansion nestled among manicured gardens, its architecture a blend of timeless elegance and modern opulence. Tall, sweeping columns guarded the entrance, and clusters of guests milled about the marble courtyard, their voices mingling with the soft strains of a string quartet. Yet for Jonathan, each face in the crowd felt like a stranger's mask, a reminder that he had grown distant from the shared intimacy of human connection. As he stepped through the ornate doors, the atmosphere of celebration enveloped him. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic patterns on the polished floors, and every corner of the hall pulsed with laughter and murmured conversations. Michael's presence was unmistakable, a vibrant spark among the gathering, greeting old friends with open arms and exuberant smiles. Yet Jonathan lingered on the periphery, a silent observer adrift in a sea of joy that somehow felt foreign. He moved slowly through clusters of guests, each interaction a fleeting glimpse of lives he no longer understood. Small groups huddled in animated discussions, and couples danced gracefully, their movements echoing unspoken promises of a shared future. Despite the beauty of it all, Jonathan felt an overwhelming sense of isolation. The merriment around him only deepened the chasm between his inner world and the vibrant life unfolding before his eyes. Memories of his past flooded back, of moments when laughter had been easy and warmth had been abundant. There was a time when the world had seemed full of possibility, and even the simplest gathering had been a celebration of life. But those days had long since faded into the background of his meticulously controlled existence. Now, every smile he encountered stirred both longing and regret, as he recalled the ease with which he once connected with others. Amid the laughter and clinking of glasses, Jonathan couldn't help but notice the subtle divisions among the guests. There were those who moved with an air of familiarity and ease, as if they belonged to a well-rehearsed script of social ritual. And then there were those who, like him, seemed to be watching from a distance, seeking solace in the anonymity of the crowd. In that moment, Jonathan wondered if he were the only one who felt the invisible barrier that separated him from genuine human contact. As the evening wore on, the grandeur of the estate began to feel both welcoming and alien. The soft lighting and melodic strains of music seemed to mock his solitude, illuminating the space between his heart and the vibrant tapestry of life around him. In a quiet corner, he found a seat and allowed himself a moment of introspection. Each laugh, each whispered conversation, served as a reminder of the relationships he had once treasured and lost. Jonathan realized that this wedding, with all its glitter and gaiety, was more than just a celebration of love. It was a mirror reflecting the distance he had placed between himself and the world. With a heavy sigh, he acknowledged that tonight might force him to confront not only the changes in Michael's life, but also the lingering ghosts of his own past. And as the night deepened, so did the questions that swirled in his mind, questions that would soon lead him down an unexpected path, toward revelations he had never imagined. Amidst the lively chatter and the soft hum of classical music, Jonathan's gaze was inexplicably drawn toward the bride. She moved with a graceful elegance that set her apart from the throngs of guests. At first, it was the way she navigated the room, a quiet, dignified confidence in her every step, that caught his attention. Her smile was warm yet tinged with a hint of sadness, and her eyes, though radiant, seemed to conceal a secret burden. As Jonathan watched her glide through the crowd, a series of memories stirred within him. He recalled moments from a distant past, of days filled with whispered confidences and shared dreams. There was something about her presence that was hauntingly familiar, something that resonated with a piece of his long-forgotten self. He found himself drawn not merely by beauty, but by a deep, inexplicable connection, a tug at the very core of his soul. It wasn't until she paused near a cluster of flower arrangements that he noticed the detail that set his heart pounding, a faint scar along the curve of her hip, just visible when she adjusted the delicate lace of her gown. In that fleeting moment, time seemed to slow. The scar, subtle yet unmistakable, ignited a rush of emotion that left Jonathan momentarily breathless. It was a mark he recognized all too well, a reminder of a painful night from years past, when Emily, the woman he had once loved, had suffered an accident that left its trace on her skin. Jonathan's mind raced as he struggled to reconcile the image before him with the memories locked away in his heart. The woman who now stood as the bride, poised and radiant under the soft glow of chandeliers, was not the stranger he had expected to see. Every graceful movement, every delicate gesture, echoed the familiar cadence of a love he thought was lost forever. Yet the context was jarring, a wedding celebration for Michael, his lifelong friend, and not for the Emily he once knew. He recalled the tender moments they had shared, quiet walks along the river, secret confessions under starlit skies, and a bond forged in the fires of youthful passion. In those cherished moments, Emily had been the embodiment of hope and possibility. But her sudden departure had shattered that dream, leaving him with a lingering emptiness that no amount of success in his professional life could fill. Now, as he watched the bride mingle effortlessly with the guests, Jonathan's heart wavered between disbelief and longing. Could it be that the woman standing before him was indeed the same Emily who had once promised him the world? The possibility seemed both impossible and inevitable, a cruel twist of fate that he was powerless to avoid. In the midst of the celebration, Jonathan felt himself caught between two realities. The vibrant present, filled with laughter and light, clashed with the haunting memories of a past that refused to fade. Every step she took, every glance she shared with those around her, resonated with a quiet familiarity that he could not ignore. And as the soft strains of the string quartet filled the air, he realized that the truth of that scar was a key that might unlock all the secrets he had buried deep within. With his heart pounding in his chest, Jonathan resolved to find answers. In that moment, the wedding no longer felt like a mere social obligation. It had transformed into a turning point, a crossroads where the past and the present converged in a single shattering revelation. And so, as the bride continued her graceful dance through the room, Jonathan knew that his journey into a painful, long-forgotten past was only just beginning. The evening's festivities blurred into a haze of music and laughter as Jonathan found himself unable to tear his eyes away from the bride. Every graceful gesture, every smile shared with an unsuspecting guest, sent tremors through the depths of his memory. That elusive scar, a delicate mark along her hip, had become a beacon in the dim corridors of his past. He recalled with painful clarity the night when Emily had been injured, the way her body had trembled under his gentle touch as he attempted to soothe her pain, and the silent promises they had exchanged in that intimate moment. Now, as he watched her move with quiet poise, the scar seemed to speak volumes. It whispered of a time when love had been raw and honest, when every touch was laden with the possibility of forever. Jonathan's mind reeled with images of a younger, vibrant Emily, the one who had laughed without reserve, who had dared to dream with him beneath starry skies. The memory was both a balm and a wound, stirring emotions he had long suppressed. His thoughts churned with disbelief and sorrow. How could it be that the woman standing before him, exuding grace, yet shrouded in an aura of distant mystery, was the same person who had once been his muse?
The revelation was jarring.
Every detail of her presence, from the gentle tilt of her head to the soft, wistful look in her eyes, bore the unmistakable imprint of a past love that had once promised a shared future. Yet here she was, now bound to another man, her life diverging from the one they had once imagined together. Jonathan's pulse quickened as he recalled the tender hours they had spent in quiet conversation, hours that had felt timeless in their intimacy. In those moments, the world had narrowed to just the two of them, and every word exchanged had been a promise of hope. Now that hope lay shattered, replaced by a painful clarity that threatened to upend his carefully ordered existence. In a sudden overwhelming rush of emotion, Jonathan felt the weight of years of regret and loss. The scar was not just a mark on her skin, it was a symbol of the choices made, the paths taken, and the love that had once burned so brightly. His mind filled with questions. Had she ever truly healed? Was the woman before him still the one he had loved, or had time and circumstance altered her beyond recognition? Lost in thought, he barely noticed the bustling crowd around him. The wedding celebration continued unabated, yet for Jonathan, the entire world had narrowed to this one poignant detail. He knew deep within that the scar was a sign, a message from the past that demanded to be acknowledged. With trembling resolve, he decided that tonight, amid the splendor and gaiety, he would seek the truth behind that mark. Whatever answers he might find could reshape everything he believed about love, loss, and the fragile nature of second chances. As the formal ceremony gave way to a lavish reception, the estate's grand ballroom filled with a vibrant mix of conversation, music, and clinking glasses.
Jonathan Wander trug se rum like a solitari figure in Adrim.
The festivities were in full swing, laughter mingled with the soft strains of a live band, and every corner of the room sparkled under the glow of ornate chandeliers. Yet despite the outward celebration, Jonathan felt an insurmountable isolation that left him questioning everything he had long taken for granted. He observed the guests with a mixture of detached curiosity and quiet despair. Couples danced, families embraced, and old friends reunited, all sharing in a collective joy that he once believed was his birthright too. But now, each smiling face only deepened the sense of alienation within him. Every laugh and every whispered conversation seemed to emphasize the distance that had grown between his own guarded heart and the world of open, heartfelt connection. Jonathan's thoughts returned repeatedly to the moment he had seen the scar, a silent, potent symbol that had reopened old wounds. Amid the clamor of celebration, he found himself lost in memories of a time when life was simpler, when love had been both painful and beautiful. The joyous chatter around him became a backdrop to his inner turmoil as he grappled with the realization that the past was not as distant as he had hoped. As he sipped a glass of chilled champagne, he recalled the promises he had once made to himself, promises to never allow regret to overshadow the beauty of living. Yet tonight, those promises felt hollow. He couldn't shake the feeling that every celebratory moment was laced with irony, as if the universe were staging this event solely to force him to confront the very emotions he had spent years burying. In a quiet corner of the room, Jonathan settled into a leather armchair, his eyes scanning the crowd for any sign of the woman whose presence now haunted him. His mind was awash with questions. What had led her to this moment? Could the pain of their shared past ever be reconciled with the bright future that everyone around them seemed to embrace? And most agonizing of all, was there any chance that the love he once believed in could be reborn from the ashes of betrayal and regret? Each question felt heavier than the last, and as the night deepened, so did his uncertainty. The reception, with its veneer of joy and sophistication, had transformed into a labyrinth of memories and unresolved emotions. Jonathan felt caught between two worlds, the vibrant present, filled with hope and promise, and a shadowed past that whispered of lost love and unspoken apologies. In that charged atmosphere, he resolved that he could no longer remain a passive observer. Tonight, he would seek the truth, however painful it might be. As the soft strains of music drifted through the room, Jonathan's determination hardened. He knew that to find peace, he must confront the questions that had long haunted him, questions that could only be answered by facing the woman who had once meant everything to him. Under the cover of the night's festivities, when the roar of conversation and laughter softened into a gentle murmur, Jonathan discovered a quiet passageway leading to a secluded garden behind the estate. The moon hung low and luminous, casting silver light over neatly trimmed hedges and a gentle fountain whose trickling water echoed like whispered secrets. It was in this hushed enclave, away from the prying eyes and joyful chaos of the reception, that Jonathan felt the full weight of his conflicted heart. He lingered by a stone bench, the cool night air brushing against his skin, as he replayed every detail of the evening in his mind. The grandeur of the hall, the fleeting glances, and most insistently, the ghost of a past that refused to fade. Then, as if fate were orchestrating the encounter, he saw her. Emily, no longer cloaked in the anonymity of the wedding crowd, stepped quietly through an arched doorway into the garden. The soft luminescence of the moon revealed the gentle lines of her face, the tender sadness in her eyes, and unmistakably, the scar that had haunted his thoughts all evening. For a long moment, they regarded each other in silence. Jonathan's heart pounded as he struggled to reconcile the woman before him with the Emily he once knew, a woman full of dreams and vulnerabilities, who had left him with so many unanswered questions. The night seemed to hold its breath as he slowly approached her. Every step was weighted with memories of laughter shared under starlight, of promises made in whispers, and of a love that had burned so fiercely it had both healed and hurt him in equal measure. "Is it really you?" he finally managed, his voice soft and trembling with a mixture of disbelief and longing. The words hung in the air, fragile as the light mist that began to descend over the garden. Emily's eyes met his, and for a moment, time itself seemed to slow. Her expression was inscrutable, a blend of sorrow and resignation, as though she had been expecting this confrontation all along. The quiet between them was filled with the sound of nature, the distant rustle of leaves, the gentle murmur of the fountain, and with the unspoken questions that had accumulated over years of separation. Jonathan's mind raced with the possibilities of what this encounter might mean. Could this be a chance at closure, or perhaps the beginning of a long-overdue reconciliation? Yet beneath the hope lay the sting of betrayal, the pain of being left in the dark without explanation for so long. Emily's lips trembled as she searched for the right words. "I never meant to hurt you," she whispered, her voice barely audible against the night's quiet symphony. The confession carried an emotion that was raw and honest, a mix of regret and tentative hope. In that isolated moment under the moonlight, the world outside seemed to vanish, leaving only two souls standing on the fragile edge between the past and an uncertain future. Jonathan's heart wavered as he absorbed her words. The air between them felt charged, as if every second was drawing them inexorably closer to a truth long concealed. The night was deep and silent, yet within that silence, both carried the weight of their shared history, a history filled with love, loss, and the lingering possibility of redemption. And in that tender, solitary moment, the first fragile steps toward confronting the past and forging a new path were silently, irrevocably taken. In the cool solitude of the garden, with only the gentle sound of water and the soft rustling of leaves for company, Emily's eyes shimmered with a mix of sorrow and resolve. The pause between them was heavy with unspoken pain, and as Jonathan's gaze searched hers for answers, she knew it was time to unveil the secret that had defined their separate lives for so long. "Jonathan," she began hesitantly, her voice quivering with the weight of years of silence, "there's something I never told you, something that changed everything." Her words hung in the air like fragile glass, ready to shatter the carefully constructed silence. Jonathan's heart pounded as he leaned in, every sense attuned to the delicate confession about to be shared. Emily's eyes, glistening with unshed tears, betrayed the inner turmoil that had kept her awake countless nights. "I was pregnant when I left," she finally whispered, the words soft yet laden with consequences that rippled through the stillness of the garden. For a moment, time itself seemed to stall. Jonathan felt as though the ground had been pulled from beneath him. Every unanswered question, every silent night spent wondering why she had vanished, converged into this single devastating revelation. The idea that she had carried their child, the child of a love once believed to be invincible, was too immense to comprehend all at once. His mind raced back to the moments they had shared, to the promises made in the quiet sanctuary of their hearts, and he struggled to reconcile the reality of her confession with the vibrant memories of a past that had once been so full of hope. The silence that followed was profound and heavy. Emily's face, illuminated by the moon's pale light, bore the marks of regret and remorse. "I was scared," she admitted, her voice trembling with vulnerability. I thought I was protecting you, protecting us, from a future I wasn't sure I could face. Her admission was both an apology and an explanation, a fragile attempt to bridge the chasm that had grown between them over the years. Jonathan's emotions surged like a tidal wave. Anger, sorrow, and a profound sense of betrayal mingled with the remnants of a deep, enduring love. He remembered a time when their dreams had been interwoven, when every whispered promise had carried the weight of a future filled with endless possibilities. Now that future lay shattered by the secret she had harbored, a secret that had left him adrift in a sea of unanswered questions. In the quiet intimacy of that moonlit garden, Jonathan struggled to find his voice. "Why?" he finally managed, his tone both a plea and an accusation. "Why did you decide to leave without telling me?" His words were laced with the anguish of years spent in uncertainty and longing for clarity. Emily's eyes welled with tears as she reached out, her hand trembling as it hovered in the space between them. "I thought it was the only way," she said softly, her voice breaking under the weight of her regret. "I didn't know how to face the consequences of my decision, and I was afraid that telling you would destroy everything we had." The confession, raw and unfiltered, shattered the delicate balance that had held them apart for so long. In that moment, under the silent watch of the night sky, Jonathan realized that the truth, painful and undeniable, was now laid bare before him. It was a truth that would forever alter the course of their lives, forcing him to confront not only the betrayal of the past, but also the possibility of forgiveness and renewal. The revelation hung in the cool night air like a specter that refused to be exorcised. Jonathan stood rooted in the garden, his mind swirling with a torrent of emotions. The confession that Emily had once carried his child, an unspoken betrayal that had haunted him for years, felt like a weight pressing upon his soul. In that moment, every memory of shared intimacy, every promise of a future together, was overlaid with a painful realization. She had chosen to keep this truth hidden, leaving him to bear the burden of uncertainty and loss. His heart pounded as he struggled to process the cascade of emotions. A part of him wanted to scream, to release the pent-up agony and anger that had accumulated over so many silent years. Yet another part of him was overwhelmed by a desperate longing for the connection they had once shared, a connection now marred by secrets and silent betrayals. "You made that decision without me," he murmured, his voice raw with anguish. "You decided to face everything alone." Emily's eyes fell to the ground, and for a long while, there was nothing but the quiet rustling of leaves and the distant sound of the fountain. The weight of her secret had rendered her mute, and in that silence, Jonathan felt the true depth of his isolation. It wasn't just that she had left him, it was that she had left him in the dark about a truth that was so intimately bound to their love, a truth that had the power to redefine everything they once believed in. As the cool night pressed in around them, the two stood in a fragile standoff of regret and unresolved pain. Jonathan's mind churned with questions, each one sharper than the last, and the silence that followed was almost unbearable. Emily's trembling hand reached out, as if seeking to bridge the chasm between them, but Jonathan recoiled slightly, unsure if the bond they once shared could ever be mended. In that charged moment, the betrayal felt not only like a personal loss, but as a shattering of the very ideals that had once defined their connection. The trust that had been the cornerstone of their relationship now lay in ruins, replaced by an unspoken gulf of hurt and disillusionment. Jonathan's eyes, once filled with the gentle light of hope, now brimmed with tears of sorrow and fury. After what felt like an eternity of silence, Emily's voice broke through, soft and tentative. "I never wanted to hurt you," she whispered, each word a plea for understanding. "I was terrified of what the future might hold if I told you the truth." Her words, though filled with remorse, did little to soothe the raw wound of betrayal. Jonathan's heart ached with the knowledge that she had taken away his right to choose, to decide for himself the course of their lives. Standing in that moonlit garden, caught between the desire to forgive and the sting of betrayal, Jonathan felt his soul laid bare. The silence was deafening, a poignant reminder that some truths, once revealed, cannot be unspoken. In that moment of quiet despair, he realized that healing might only begin when both of them faced the consequences of a past that would no longer remain hidden in the shadows. The night silence was shattered by the raw urgency in Jonathan's voice as he stepped away from the tender vulnerability of the garden and back into the pulsating heart of the reception. Determined to confront not only the secrets of the past but also the tangled web of emotions that had kept them apart for so long, he sought out Emily with a fervor born of both desperation and resolve. Amidst the fading echoes of laughter and clinking glasses, he found her alone in a quiet alcove near the edge of the ballroom. "Emily," he began, his voice trembling with restrained emotion, "I need to understand."
Inito nove epsilon you left them in the dark altese ears.
Why did you decide on your own without giving me a chance to choose? His words, raw and unfiltered, carried the weight of years spent in silent anguish and unanswered questions. Emily's eyes, still shimmering with unshed tears, met his with a mixture of sorrow and resignation. I was afraid, she confessed softly. Afraid that if I told you, you would see me as weak, as someone incapable of facing the consequences of a decision that changed everything for both of us. Her voice faltered, and for a moment, the tumult of the past seemed to hang between them, a bridge built on memories and shattered promises. Jonathan's heart pounded as he absorbed her confession. Every word seemed to chip away at the carefully constructed defenses he had built over the years. But you left me, he said, his voice rising with the pent-up frustration of decades of silence. You made that decision alone, and in doing so, you robbed me of the chance to share in that burden, to decide if I was willing to face it together. His eyes searched hers, desperate for a sign that the woman he once loved still existed beneath the layers of regret. The tension between them was palpable. In that dimly lit alcove, with a soft murmur of the reception far behind, the past reasserted itself with a force that neither could deny. Emily's face was etched with remorse as she whispered, "I know I hurt you, Jonathan. I thought I was protecting us from something too painful to bear, but I now see that in doing so, I only deepened the wound." Her words were laden with the weight of countless sleepless nights and the silent agony of a love that had been fractured by fear. Jonathan's voice wavered as he continued, "It wasn't just about protecting you, was it? It was about you not trusting me enough to let me be a part of your struggle, your decision. How was I supposed to know that you were carrying our future with you all along?" His words echoed in the stillness, a poignant reminder of the shared dreams that had been lost to time and secrecy. For a long, heavy moment, the only sound was the distant hum of the celebration, a cruel contrast to the storm of emotions raging between them. The confrontation was not merely an airing of grievances, it was a reckoning with the past, a moment when every suppressed tear, every hidden regret, came rushing forth. In that fraught exchange, both felt the raw vulnerability of souls laid bare, caught between the desire to reclaim what was lost and the painful recognition that some wounds may never truly heal. As the conversation unfolded, Jonathan realized that their shared history was a tapestry of both joy and sorrow, and that confronting the past was the only way to move forward. With a final trembling plea, he asked, "Can we ever find a way to mend what's been broken?" The question, laden with hope and despair in equal measure, hung in the air as the two stood on the precipice of a future that was as uncertain as it was inevitable. In the quiet aftermath of their heated exchange, Jonathan and Emily found themselves suspended in a space where words no longer mattered, a fragile silence that spoke volumes of all that had been lost and all that might yet be salvaged.
The tension in the alcove slowly gave way to an almost palpable stillness.
Jonathan's eyes, red-rimmed and searching, met Emily's with an intensity that defied the passage of time. Both knew that this was a crossroads, a moment when the scars of the past could either condemn them to a lifetime of regret or open the door to forgiveness and renewal. Jonathan's mind replayed the years of solitude, the countless nights spent questioning his worth, and the relentless ache of betrayal that had festered in his heart. Yet, as he looked at Emily, he also saw the vulnerability of a woman who had been as wounded as he had. The realization was bittersweet. Both of them had carried their respective burdens, sheltering themselves behind walls built of fear and pride. In that quiet space, the unspoken decision was made, to confront the future together, regardless of the pain of the past. Gently, as if testing the fragile bridge between them, Jonathan reached out and placed his hand over Emily's. The gesture was tentative, yet filled with a quiet determination. "I can't change what happened," he murmured, "but maybe we can find a way to move forward." His voice was soft, vulnerable, a stark contrast to the anger and hurt that had once defined their conversation. For a moment, the world around them faded away, leaving only the two of them in a shared cocoon of hope and uncertainty. Emily's eyes glistened with unshed tears as she nodded slowly. "I never meant for it to be this way," she whispered. "I was so lost in my fear that I never realized how much I was hurting you." Her admission was both an apology and a plea for understanding, a fragile bridge over the chasm of years spent apart. In that moment, the scars they both bore seemed to tell a story of resilience rather than defeat. As the soft strains of a distant piano melody filtered through the open doors of the reception hall, both felt the stirring of something new, a possibility that perhaps, just perhaps, they could heal together. The decision was unspoken, yet it resonated powerfully in the silence. They would not allow the past to dictate their future any longer. Instead, they would try to build a new chapter from the ruins of what had been lost. In that hushed space, where time itself seemed to pause, Jonathan and Emily embraced the uncertainty of tomorrow. The love they once knew was fragile and marred by mistakes, but it was also real, a testament to the fact that even the deepest wounds could someday be mended. And so, with hearts heavy yet hopeful, they chose to take the first tentative steps on a path that promised both pain and the possibility of redemption. The weight of secrets had become too heavy to bear alone. In the dim glow of the reception hall, Jonathan knew that silence would no longer serve as a refuge. Michael Turner, his lifelong friend, the man whose wedding had inadvertently become the stage for this painful reunion, deserved the truth. With a resolve tempered by years of inner turmoil, Jonathan found Michael in a quiet corner of the crowded room. Michael's face, usually animated with laughter and warmth, now wore an expression of quiet confusion as he noticed the solemn look in Jonathan's eyes. "Michael, there's something I need to tell you," Jonathan began, his voice steady but heavy with the gravity of his confession. The murmur of the celebration faded into the background as he recounted the story of the past, the hidden pregnancy, the secret departure, and the painful betrayal that had defined his relationship with Emily. Every word was delivered with a raw sincerity that made Michael's brow furrow in disbelief and sorrow. As Jonathan spoke, the room seemed to narrow around them, isolating the two friends in a bubble of shared anguish and regret. Michael listened intently, his eyes searching Jonathan's face for hints of deception or remorse. With each revelation, the air grew heavier, laden with the unspoken acknowledgement that everything they had once taken for granted was now irrevocably altered. Michael's expression shifted from confusion to a painful understanding, his silence speaking volumes even as he struggled to process the enormity of the revelation. When Jonathan finished, there was a long, painful pause. Michael's eyes glistened with unshed tears as he finally whispered, "I
Ineva kne."
The admission was not just about the betrayal, it was about the deep sense of loss for the friend he had believed he knew so well. Jonathan's heart ached at the sight, knowing that the truth had severed a part of the bond they once shared. "I'm sorry," Jonathan said, his voice barely audible over the soft background music. "I never wanted it to come to this, but you deserve to know." Michael's silence was both a condemnation and an acknowledgement of the betrayal, a betrayal that had come from the one person he had trusted implicitly. As Michael slowly turned away, his steps heavy with the weight of the revelation, Jonathan felt a profound sense of isolation. The truth had been laid bare, and with it came the possibility that nothing would ever be the same between them. Yet, in that painful moment, Jonathan also recognized that honesty, however brutal, was the only path toward healing. Michael's retreat was a stark reminder that the consequences of secrets could not be undone by time or regret. For Jonathan, the confession was both a catharsis and a burden. The revelation of Emily's hidden truth had severed the final thread of silence that had long held him captive. As he watched Michael disappear into the crowd, Jonathan knew that the journey toward redemption and reconciliation would be fraught with pain. But it was a necessary step if he was to reclaim the life and love that had once been his foundation. And so, amid the clamor of the celebration, Jonathan resolved to face the future with honesty, no matter how painful the cost. As the night drew to a close and the last strains of music faded into the cool pre-dawn air, Jonathan found himself standing once more beneath the soft glow of moonlight, this time facing Emily, not as a figure from a painful past, but as a woman with whom he might forge a new beginning. The garden, which had borne witness to the raw confessions and heart-wrenching revelations of the night, now seemed imbued with a quiet promise of renewal. In the gentle hush of early morning, the scars of old betrayals appeared less like marks of shame and more like reminders of survival. Jonathan's heart, though still burdened by the weight of years of isolation and regret, began to stir with a tentative hope. With each slow, deliberate step, he moved toward Emily, a woman who had been both his deepest pain and his longest-held love. "Emily," he said softly, his voice echoing with both sorrow and determination, "we can't undo what's been done. But maybe we can learn from it, build something new, even if it means starting from scratch." His words, spoken with a vulnerability that belied his years of stoic detachment, were met with a fragile smile and a tear that glistened in the pre-dawn light. Emily's eyes, still red from their earlier confrontation, held a spark of cautious optimism. "I've spent so many years running from the past," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I thought leaving everything behind would protect us both. But I see now that secrets only make the wounds deeper." The confession was both a lament and a pledge, a promise that she, too, was ready to face the consequences of a life built on half-truths. Together, they walked slowly along a winding garden path, their conversation a quiet tapestry of memories, regrets, and the tentative plans of a future that was still unwritten. The night's revelations had stripped away the illusions of perfection, revealing a raw, unvarnished truth, that love, in all its messy imperfection, was worth fighting for. In that fragile moment of shared understanding, Jonathan and Emily chose to let go of the past's harsh judgments and look forward to the possibility of healing. Jonathan's mind wandered back to the painful memories of betrayal and silence, but now he saw them as lessons rather than curses. The scars, both physical and emotional, had become markers of resilience, a testament to the fact that even in the darkest moments, there is the potential for rebirth. As the first light of dawn began to break over the horizon, the garden seemed to shimmer with a promise of new beginnings. Standing side by side, their hands entwined with a cautious intimacy, Jonathan and Emily silently vowed to rebuild what had been lost. They understood that the journey ahead would be fraught with challenges, that trust would need to be slowly and earnestly rebuilt. Yet, in that serene pre-dawn glow, the future felt possible, a blank page waiting to be filled with the stories of forgiveness, hope, and the quiet triumph of love over the scars of the past. And so, as the night gave way to the promise of a new day, Jonathan Harper and Emily stepped forward together onto a path that was uncertain but undeniably their own, a path illuminated by the lessons of yesterday and the quiet promise of tomorrow.
Thank you for watching until the end.
If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with your thoughts. What do you think will happen next?
Let me know.
Your support keeps these stories coming, so stay tuned for more thrilling episodes. See you in the next one.